I read Almost Anywhere: Road Trip Ruminations on Love, Nature, National Parks, and Nonsense by Krista Schlyer. This is a reread for me. It's a memoir about a car trip that the author takes through the American kind of national park system, where she kind of like lives out of her car for about 2 years or so after the death of her partner. And she is in her late 20s at this point. And the idea of the book is that by experiencing the trauma of this, her partner Daniel dies of testicular cancer that spreads into other parts of his body, and basically he dies of cancer at a very young age. And because of this trauma, it just kind of like changes her entire relationship with like her life, and she wants to go out and try to heal from this, but she feels like she can't do it just in the regular world that exists for us in culture, and instead wants to touch base with the natural world that, we come from originally, and that this will help to heal her. And her partner, Daniel, was also like big into hiking. He wanted to do the Appalachian Trail system. And once he realized that he was going to die, he wanted his ashes to be spread in the national forests in the northeast of America. And so he felt connected to nature, and I think this kind of helps her to connect with him or connect her grief, to these places and help kind of disperse it. She also goes on the trip with her best friend, Bill, who was also Daniel's best friend and is her ex-boyfriend. And I can't tell if they are romantically involved during this trip. It seems like they are. I don't know. They care about each other a lot, which is the real point, but they also get on each other's nerves, and they live in a station wagon. They live in like a Saturn in the early 2000s. So that's pretty confined space. And then they also have a dog along for the whole trip. And so to me, this is a very like Gen X kind of a story. I'm also Gen X. And I remember this time in my life, I also had a Saturn. It also broke down from time to time, and I would go to the repair place and get the coffee and donuts that they were famous for. And I did a whole road trip where I went to a couple national parks, but my road trip was like going to different baseball stadiums, both minor league and major league, all over the United States. But also that year, I ended up becoming homeless and losing my car and having to sleep outside and stuff. And so there are things about this story that remind me of this exact time when I'm a little bit younger than these people, but, like in a similar place in my life, kind of, but for completely different reasons. I hadn't experienced the death of anybody in the way that they had. But I think I was in a deep crisis point in my life. And part of the answer in my mind to a crisis was to go on some kind of journey, to go somewhere else. And that by going on a journey, the answer to my problem would emerge. That was kind of my thinking. And I think it is the same thinking that a lot of people in my generation have. There's like the eat, pray, love kind of phenomenon. And maybe the change in setting does kind of shake something up in your mind. But what I found was that no matter where you go, you're still there. So like you kind of bring your problems with you, and there's no getting away from them. But in the course of this story, Schlyer seems to feel that she heals and kind of reconnects with something that is important inside of her. She finds a purpose that she can dedicate her life to that is meaningful enough that her grief isn't so overwhelming. And that has to do with conservation, and her and Bill start a like foundation or magazine or something like that that has to do with like her love of photography and writing, and they will try to advocate for the park system and for conservation and for saving the environment and saving the planet, things like that. So the trip teaches them like the importance and of the national park system, of the natural world, our access to it, and how it can offer more than a place for animals to live, but a place for us to be the kind of natural creatures that we were designed to be, and that needs to be preserved for future generations. It needs to be protected because there's nothing else like it in our culture. And so this, I guess, after the book becomes one of the fundamental parts of her life. And she discovered what would be meaningful to her through this experience. There's a lot of stories in the book that are funny, others that are poignant, others that are sad. And there's a lot of absurdity in there as well. Just a lot of kind of slice of life type stuff. There's a lot of surprisingly more naked men, old men in the story than you might guess by reading the back of the cover kind of situations. And her worry about the future generations having access to this kind of experience that she had makes me wonder what it would be like to try and do this nowadays with this hypervigilance around drug trafficking across borders and suspicion being laid on people who are, traveling around for that reason, and immigration and things like that. And just the kind of all around political tension and hyper policing that's going on, combined with a selling out of the national park system for its natural resources, and then the simultaneous cutting down of staff who maintain the trails and keep the systems safe for visitors and things like that. And so just all around a kind of backwards motion on everything that would be necessary for this kind of trip, but also the increased cost of fuel and the rapid climb of inflation over the last 8 or 9 years. I feel like it wouldn't be possible for a young person to do this kind of trip, honestly. I can remember, like I said, around that same time, and I had a Saturn. The Saturn cost me around $2,000. And it's just simply not possible to get any kind of car for $2,000 nowadays, let alone one that you could reliably drive all around the country and afford to repair whenever it broke down, here or there, as it does throughout the book. And so in that way, I think her worries were kind of valid. I think the actual worries that she has in the book, though, have more to do with the kind of climate change and the science behind climate change, predicting, escalating temperatures that would lead to kind of catastrophic consequences for the animals and eventually for the plants as well. And just making it impossible for the natural world to continue in the face of human civilization, especially Western European and American style civilization. So that's more what she's worried about than changes in government and whatnot, but it's not unrelated in my mind. structurally, she puts a lot of between the anecdotes as they go from place to place. She includes a lot of facts about the different places, and then also, history and things like that. So you get a sense of America at this time. And then there's also the fact that during the book, 9/11 happens. And so their reaction to that and the way that this kind of thing shook out for different people in various circumstances throughout the country. There's a glimpse into a kind of lifestyle that I knew people at this time who also lived like this. I don't really know anybody anymore in this lifestyle, but I'm sure it exists. It's probably even more people now, to be honest. This kind of itinerant lifestyle where there's very little working life or a sense of a career, and the people just kind of go from place to place and subsist on very little. And so there's different people that they meet at these parks who are just like they've been traveling for years, or they don't really have a job and things like that. And at no point in the book does she have a sense that she's homeless, but I mean, that is kind of what's going on. There are people nowadays who talk about like van life. There's a lot of people who live in their cars now, but they live in them and stay in one place. So it's more like kind of apartment situation than it is the kind of migratory life that she is leading, where she also doesn't have a job. And the van life people, a lot of them are subsidizing their existence, and, like they're blogging about it, or they have, some kind of social media presence that helps to fund the way that they're living. And she didn't have any of that. Her and Bill just kind of like sold everything that they had and then used that money to fund the entire adventure. And they have it as a sense of adventure. There's not a sense to it of it being a job. And while she's careful to journal a lot of stuff, maybe she had in the back of her mind that she could write this book one day, but there's not any specific goal or anything like that. So there's nothing kind of performative in the entire experience, I guess is what I'm saying. And she gives a lot of space for her emotions and grief to play out, which I think is a wise choice, emotionally, but is kind of wild to me. you know, Again, at this time, I was also on the road and very possibly could have bumped into these people. And so I would have had a very similar mindset at the time that, like this is how life should be lived, and on like that. And I'm not the kind of person who like believes in careers being a good thing or that we need to uphold the system as it is. But I can't imagine selling everything and going on the road and like going into the woods and living in a tent and stuff like that and expecting something to come to me from that experience at this point in my life. And so I wonder if it's just, kind of something about your 20s that you can get something out of this type of experience, or if something has changed in me, or if she, really did find anything, or, just had enough time pass for the grief to get out of the way of, the next step that she was going to take in life. The kind of reaction that I had at the end where they just kind of decide they're going to start a foundation and they're going to start a publication and try to save the forest seems nice, but at the same time, like, I don't know, like I struggled so hard at that point in my life and had absolutely nothing. And I certainly couldn't turn around and just start something because I felt like it was a good idea. But then again, maybe I could have, and I just don't know how to do it or don't believe in myself enough. or what, but there was some aspect to the book that was kind of like a little bit aspirational, holding out to the reader like, hey, you could have an experience like this. Look what I did. Look how it changed my life and it gave me direction. Maybe you'll go on an adventure and then you'll decide the next step in your life, and you can take that step. And just at no point in my life have I ever felt like I have the freedom or ability to take a step anywhere and start anything. There's no space for that. There's no margin. There's nothing to use to get it going. So like at that point in my life, I was eating garbage out of garbage cans. I was sleeping in the woods, and family had to pull me out of that entire situation. And when I kind of got back on my feet, even more grief and hard times just knocked me back down in different ways when I did try to start something. So I don't know, like reading the book makes me feel really depressed and kind of angry, which is just a reaction that is personal to me and doesn't speak to anything in the book. And I can't remember how it went for me the other time that I read it, if I liked it or what I pulled out of it. As I read it again, I remembered the things that were going to happen. I was like, oh yeah, and then they're going to go to this and then this will happen. And so like the writing of it was memorable. I think there are lots of passages that are beautifully written, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It just stirs up a kind of bitterness and resentment in me, a kind of class resentment sort of feeling that I think more to me holds up a mirror to my own inner state than any kind of judgment that I would feel towards these people for doing what they felt they had to do at the time. So part of the point of reading for me is not to, is to learn about myself and not to kind of in a reactionary way turn around with my feelings and then project onto the book some kind of judgment and say like, well, I didn't feel entertained, or now I have this angry, bitter feeling, and therefore the book is bad. And here are all the ways that I could point out the book is bad. Like the experience that you have is the experience that you have. And there are all kinds of factors that play into that, things that are going on in my life right now, what was happening, all throughout the day today as I was going through the book, and things like that that are happening simultaneously are factors. The way that I feel in my body is a factor, like am I having pains? Am I whatever is going on, that can make you grumpy, and then things in the book just reflect that back to you. And so my point being that like a lot of criticism that I see people do feels to me like they had some kind of bad experience, a reading experience, and then that is immediately the fault of the book, and the entire experience needs to be laid at the feet of the book. While I think any good or bad experience that I have purely comes from me interacting with the book, and so I can leverage the feeling to kind of pull out deeper meanings from the art. Like, what is the art giving me that is taking me to this place, in other words? And so it kind of makes me like reflect on criticism itself, I guess, is what I'm saying. And that I will never take my feelings and use them as a weapon against any book, because those feelings are participating in the experience of the book. And it's valuable to understand in myself what's going on. And so there's strong feelings that I still have about that time in my life and the experiences that I had, the things that I went through. And books like this pull those feelings back up that are not resolved. And so it's worth contemplating, but maybe not worth going on a trip and letting my grief play out until I find a new purpose, since I've already tried that and it didn't go that well.